Rasipuram Krishnaswamy Iyer Narayanaswamy, better known as R.K. Narayan, 10 October 1906 to 13 May 2001, was an Indian writer and novelist known for his work set in the fictional South Indian town of Malgudi. He was a leading author of early Indian literature in English along with Mulk Raj Anand and Raja Rao. Under the Banyan Tree and Other Stories is a collection of short stories by R.K. Narayan, set in and around the fictitious town of Malgudi in South India. The stories range from the humorous to the serious and all are filled with Narayan's acute observations of human nature. The concluding story, Under the Banyan Tree, is about a village storyteller who concludes his career by taking a vow of silence for the rest of his life, realizing that a storyteller must have the sense to know when to stop and not wait for others to tell him. The author, R.K. Narayan, Nambi, a wonderful storyteller, an important figure in the story, a self-satisfied man, a devotional man. Population of the Somal was less than 300. The village Somal in forest tracts of Mempi. It's a tank, a small expanse of water. Used for several work or all purposes water. Drinking, bathing, washing of cattle and clothes. Start. The village Somal, nestling away in the forest tracts of Mempi, had a population of less than 300. It was in every way a village to make the heart of a rural reformer sink. Its tank, a small expanse of water, right in the middle of the village, served for drinking, bathing, and washing the cattle, and it bred malaria, typhoid, and heaven knew what else. The cottages sprawled, anyhow, and the lanes twisted and wriggled up and down and strangled each other. The population used the highway as the refuse ground, and in the backyard of every house drain water stagnated in green puddles. Such was the village. It is likely that the people of the village were insensitive, but it is more than likely that they never noticed their surroundings, because they lived in a kind of perpetual enchantment. The enchanter was Nambi the storyteller. He was a man of about 60 or 70. Or was he 80, or 180? Who could say? In a place so much cut off as Somal. The nearest bus stop was 10 miles away. Reckoning could hardly be in the familiar measures of time. If anyone asked Nambi what his age was, he referred to an ancient famine or an invasion or the building of a bridge, and indicated how high he had stood from the ground at the time. He was illiterate, in the sense that the written word was a mystery to him. But he could make up a story, in his head, at the rate of one a month. Each story took nearly 10 days to narrate. His home was the little temple which was at the very end of the village. No one could say how he had come to regard himself as the owner of the temple. The temple was a very small structure with red striped walls, with a stone image of the goddess Shakti in the sanctum. The front portion of the temple was Nambi's home. For aught it mattered, any place might be his home, for he was without possessions. All that he possessed was a broom with which he swept the temple, and he had also a couple of dhotis and upper cloth. He spent most of the day in the shade of the banyan which spread out its branches in front of the temple. When he felt hungry, he walked into any house that caught his fancy and joined the family at dinner. When he needed new clothes, they were brought to him by the villagers. He hardly ever had to go out in search of company, for the banyan shade served as a clubhouse for the village folk. All through the day, people came seeking Nambi's company and squatted under the tree. If he was in a mood for it, he listened to their talk and entertained them with his own observations and anecdotes. When he was in no mood, he looked at the visitors sourly and asked, "What do you think I am? Don't blame me if you get no story. At the next moon, unless I meditate, how can the goddess give me a story? Do you think stories float in the air?" And he moved out to the edge of the forest and squatted there, contemplating the trees. On Friday evenings the village turned up at the temple for worship. When Nambi lit a score of mud lamps and arranged them around the threshold of the sanctuary. He decorated the image with flowers, which grew wildly in the backyard of the temple. He acted as the priest and offered to the goddess fruits and flowers brought in by the villagers. On the nights he had a story to tell, he lit a small lamp and placed it in a niche in the trunk of the banyan tree. Villagers, as they returned home in the evening, saw this, went home, and said to their wives, now, hurry up with the dinner, the storyteller is calling us. As the moon crept up behind the hillock, men, women, and children gathered under the banyan tree. The storyteller would not appear yet. He would be sitting in the sanctum, before the goddess, with his eyes shut, in deep meditation. He sat thus as long as he liked, and when he came out, with his forehead ablaze with ash and vermilion, he took his seat on a stone platform in front of the temple. It was story building on an epic scale. The first day barely conveyed the setting of the tale, and Nambi's audience as yet had no idea who were coming into the story. As the moon slipped behind the trees of Mempi Forest, Nambi said, now friends, mother says this will do for the day. He abruptly rose, went in, lay down, and fell asleep long before the babble of the crowd ceased. The light in the niche would again be seen 2 or 3 days later, and again throughout the bright half of the month. Kings and heroes, villains and fairy-like women, gods in human form, saints and assassins, jostled each other in that world which was created under the banyan tree. Nambi's voice rose and fell in an exquisite rhythm in the moonlight, and the hour completed the magic. On the day when the story ended, the whole gathering went into the sanctum and prostrated before the goddess. By the time the next moon peeped over the hillock, Nambi was ready with another story. He never repeated the same kind of story or brought in the same set of persons, and the village folk considered Nambi a sort of miracle, quoted his words of wisdom, and lived on the whole in an exalted plane of their own. Though their life in all other respects was hard and drab, and yet it had gone on for years and years. One moon he lit the lamp in the tree. The audience came. The old man took his seat and began the story. Single quote ellipsis. When King Vikramaditya lived, his minister was, he paused. He could not get beyond it. He made a fresh beginning. There was the king, he said. Repeated it, and then his words trailed off into a vague mumbling. What has come over me? He asked pathetically. Oh, mother, great mother, why do I stumble and falter? I know the story. I had the whole of it a moment ago. What was it about? I can't understand what has happened. He faltered and looked so miserable that his audience said, take your own time. You are perhaps tired. Shut up, he cried. Am I tired? Wait a moment, I will tell you the story. Presently, following this, there was utter silence. Eager faces looked up at him. Don't look at me, he flared up. Somebody gave him a tumbler of milk. The audience waited patiently. This was a new experience. Some persons expressed their sympathy aloud. Some persons began to talk among themselves. Those who sat in the outer edge of the crowd silently slipped away. Gradually, as it neared midnight, others followed this example. Nambi sat staring at the ground, his head bowed in thought. For the first time he realized that he was old. He felt he would never more be able to control his thoughts or express them cogently. He looked up. Everyone had gone except his friend Mari the blacksmith. Mari, why aren't you also gone? Mari apologized for the rest. They didn't want to tire you, so they have gone away. Nambi got up. You were right. Tomorrow I will make it up. Age. What is my age? It has come on suddenly. He pointed at his head and said, this says, old fool, don't think I shall be your servant any more. You will be my servant hereafter. It is disobedient and treacherous. Those who sat in the outer edge of the crowd silently slipped away. Gradually, as it neared midnight, others followed this example. Nambi sat staring at the ground, his head bowed in thought. For the first time he realized that he was old. He felt he would never more be able to control his thoughts or express them cogently. He looked up. Everyone had gone except his friend Mari the blacksmith. Mari, why aren't you also gone? Mari apologized for the rest. They didn't want to tire you, so they have gone away. Nambi got up. You were right. Tomorrow I will make it up. Age. What is my age? It has come on suddenly. He pointed at his head and said, this says, old fool, don't think I shall be your servant any more. You will be my servant. Hereafter, it is disobedient and treacherous. He indicated by gesture that he had spoken his last words. When he felt hungry he walked into any cottage and silently sat down for food, and walked away the moment he had eaten. Beyond this he had hardly anything to demand of his fellow beings. The rest of his life he lived for a few more years was one